people show up.
Okay, we are now live.
Thank you, Amy. Sorry, Jessica, what was that?
I said, yes, we could certainly do that, and we can just approve minutes at the next meeting.
Perfect. Good afternoon and welcome to the August 25th, 2021 City of Asheville Multimodal Transportation Commission meeting. My name is Dennis Wenzel and I'm the chair of this group. Our meetings are being held virtually for the time being, but we do have multiple ways for you interested parties to take part in this gathering. The City of Asheville's engagement hub is the best way to find the links and phone numbers that can engage, allow you to engage into this meeting. Members and staff and guests, please remember to keep your microphones muted at all times when you're not speaking so we can minimize background noise and other feedback. Since we don't have a quorum currently, we're going to move forward to new business and then hopefully come back and circle around to our agenda and approval of the last meeting's minutes. Jessica, should we move forward with the Hendersonville Road presentation?
Yes, please. Thank you. We have members of the French Broad River Metropolitan Planning Organization here with us this afternoon. We have Tristan Winkler and we have John Ridout, and they are going to give us presentations on both of the corridor studies that were completed by the MPO over the last year and a half or so. So we're very thankful to have them today to give you guys an overview. You know, keep in mind these documents are quite large, so they are just going to be giving you the highlights, and we would encourage you to take a look at the documents at your convenience.
Excellent. Thanks for everyone being here. Take it away.
Okay, great. John, would you be able to share your screen?
So that is what I'm currently, it's showing that I am sharing screen. Is anybody seeing it?
No, not yet.
All right, sorry. It's kind of challenging with my mic's in the way. Let's try this. Yep, it just kicked me out.
Actually, John, if I can interrupt you,
okay.
I think I do now have a quorum, and so maybe I could start from the top, give you a second to kind of get all the kinks worked out there. Is that okay with you?
Okay.
All right, I appreciate that, and I apologize for the shuffle that's going on here. Okay, it looks like we now have a quorum, and so we're going to start at the top of our agenda. So I'm going to ask the commission members to introduce themselves and which group they represent. Randy Warren.
Hi, I'm Randy Warren, and I'm on the Bike Ped Task Force.
Hello, Randy. Michael Stratton.
Everybody, I'm Michael Stratton. I'm an at-large member.
Hey, Michael. Kenny Armstrong. I don't think Kenny was able to make it today. Pat Katz. I didn't see Pat on here as well. John Balsoni.
Hi, I'm John Balsoni, and I represent Transit.
Hey, John. Maggie Ullman.
Hey, y'all. Maggie Ullman, and I am on the Bike Ped Task Force with Randy.
Hey, Maggie. Bill Loftus is unable to join us today. Carla Fernari is our newest member, just appointed last night. She will join us next month. Anna Sexton was unable to join us, unfortunately. Joe Archibald.
Hi, I'm Joe Archibald, and I'm the Planning and Zoning Liaison to the Multimodal Transit Commission.
Hey, Joe. And Kim Rooney. I think I saw Kim joining us. Well, Kim's our council liaison, and always they're looking out for us and helping us through this process. The first order of business will be to review and approve today's agenda. Can I get a motion to approve today's agenda?
Yeah, make a motion.
The motion from Maggie, can I get a second?
I'll second that. This is Michael Stratton.
Michael, second. And any comments or discussion?
Yeah, I have a comment. So on the last meeting, we said that we were going to have the bike share study. It was on the agenda for last meeting and it wasn't ready to be presented at the last meeting. So we said we would present it at this meeting and it's not on the agenda for this meeting. So I just was wondering about that.
Yeah, it's still not complete yet.
Okay.
Is there an idea of timing on that?
Well, I can't really give you a timeline at this moment. I'm working on it. Dan has gone through it and made some updates, and I have not yet had a chance to look at it.
Okay, great. Any other comments on the agenda? All right. We'll go through a roll call. Randy?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Maggie?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Motion carries. The next order of business is the approval of the minutes from the July 28th, 2021 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve.
Randy moves to approve. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
John, second. Any comments, questions, concerns? Randy?
Yeah, so in the bike share item, actually in the meeting last month, there was a comment that we were talking about e-bikes and it wasn't very clearly stated in the bike in the minutes. The bike share will include e-bikes, but it will also include non-e-bikes too. The minutes kind of make it look like it's going to only include e-bikes, but I want to make sure that it's clear that the bike share program will include both e-bikes and just human powered bikes. And then the second thing I had too was on the Merriman Avenue discussion point. There was a comment that I made about NCDOT following policy, and the minutes didn't really reflect what that was either. So staff at NCDOT said that they have a policy of putting state interests over city interests, and that was their highest priority. And what we were trying to tell them too is that they had a complete streets policy and a Vision Zero policy that the state has also mandated that they follow. And so we were trying to make sure that they understood that local interests weren't conflicting with those two other priorities. And that wasn't clearly reflected in the minutes.
Okay, we can make those changes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think those are important just to make sure we're going to step gingerly through this process. So I think it's good to be as clear as possible on our side. So we can table that item and we can vote on that at the next meeting if that's okay with the rest of the commissioners. All right.
I think we can approve them with those two changes too. You can do either way, I think.
Sure. Do you want to see them before you approve them, or do you feel comfortable that?
In the past, staff has asked me just to give them the language to change it. So if they're comfortable with that, I can do that as well.
Okay. Well, that certainly works.
That's fine.
Perfect. Excellent. All right. Roll call vote. Randy Warren.
Aye.
Michael Stratton.
Aye.
John Bassoni.
Aye.
Maggie Ullman.
Aye.
And I'm aye as well. Motion carries. We have no public comment at this time. Amy, is that still the case?
Yes, that is.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. So we'll go back to our first order of new business, which is the presentation on Hendersonville Road that we were working out some kinks. Looks like we're ready to roll. Folks, please take it away. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. For folks who don't know me, I'm Tristan Winkler. I am the director of the French Broad River Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO. I'm joined by John on our staff. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Rideout. I am a regional transportation planner with the French Broad River MPO, as well as a multimodal commission alumni. So I served from 2014 through 2020. So glad to be back here.
And also with us are a few consultants from our Tunnel Road team, Caitlin Tobin from Kittleson and Associates, and also Christy Carter and Christy Stout. Although I believe the Christies are here for another item, we might prod them anyway. So to get into it, John, if you want to go to the next slide. Very generally, for those who don't know what an MPO is and does, to keep it very high level and brief, essentially the MPO is a regional forum for transportation decision making for a metropolitan planning area. It's a bit of a mouthful, but generally it tries to look at a metropolitan area and get together everyone who's involved in maintaining and improving the transportation network. So NCDOT, as well as our member governments, including the City of Asheville, Buncombe County, Henderson County, its municipalities, Haywood County, its municipalities, and small parts of Madison and Transylvania counties. But we do a lot of work, including maintaining the region's long-range 25-year plan, also known as the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and also help to determine the distribution and programming of transportation funds throughout the region. Next slide. So just a little bit on the corridor studies program that we've started very recently over the last couple of years. We see this as currently a partnership between the MPO, Buncombe County, and the City of Asheville. And also to note, we brought along NCDOT for these studies as well, and they've been fantastic partners throughout them. Generally, each study provided multiple inputs for public input, or multiple opportunities for public input. And so it's a bit different in terms of the project development process that we've gone through in the past for other projects. And also these documents are meant to give us a starting point for a vision of positive change for each of these corridors. A lot of what's mentioned in the city's comp plan and some of the city's other transportation plans are really talking about large wholesale changes to a number of corridors. We haven't addressed all of them yet, but to get started on these two, really what we're talking about is changing the way these corridors work and how people move within and through these corridors. Next slide. Generally, we kind of saw two big reasons to do corridor studies. One was to better document a vision for the future. As you see on the right, there's a lot of acronyms that go into transportation planning. We develop our comprehensive transportation plan, our metropolitan transportation plan. Projects go through prioritization, also known as SPOT. They get into the TIP. And what we've seen over and over is that it's after all of these decisions have been made and then projects get into design and construction, that's usually when people get the most interested in those projects. So our hope by having these corridor studies is that we can engage the public sooner, engage stakeholders sooner, document that vision for change, and make sure that's part of the decision-making process earlier on. One, for clarity about what exactly we're pursuing and trying to get funded, but also just to be clear and be advocates for our communities about what we should be and need to be pushing for. As you see in the bullet points, a lot of that speaks to making sure that we can build a realistic budget for some of these projects. That's something that's come up a lot fairly recently. But also, again, engaging the communities who have a better idea of some of the specific needs, may have envisioned some possibilities and solutions for their corridors. Next slide. And reason number 2 is to try to tie transportation and land use together. This is something that gets talked about a lot in planning and transportation circles. Basically that we can't have a transportation project that by itself is going to fix everything and, you know, turn an area into a bicycling mecca or a place where we see a large amount of mode shift. Working transportation and land use together, we think is very, very important. They play into each other in terms of how trips are generated, but also helping to influence the choices people make about how they will be moving through their community. Next slide. And so the last point to make is that with these documents, a lot of what's shown are pretty high level recommendations. Some of them are a bit more fleshed out, but generally speaking, again, we are trying to have this process earlier on. And so there is no imminent construction that is going to happen once these documents are approved. These are really trying to get ahead of those decisions and trying to make sure that we have our ducks in a row before we go out and get a lot of these projects funded and get the different pieces, including land use, coordinated so that we can really start to make some of those wholesale changes to the corridor. So that's my high level part of this. From there, I will hand it off to John to get into some of the nitty gritty on these studies. Take it away, John.
Okay, thank you, Tristan. Just a quick housekeeping item. So we are presenting the Hendersonville Road Corridor Study and the Tunnel Road Corridor Study together, kind of in lockstep. We will be going through the existing conditions together, and then once we break out into the specific recommendations, we will jump into each project individually. So if there's ever a question of figuring out which project I'm talking about, or if you want to refer to any information, I provided the icons, the logos for each corridor study in the bottom left or top right. If I am referencing another plan, just to make sure that to prevent confusion of where a recommendation might be coming in, we've also provided the Asheville in Motion mobility plan, as well as the Living Asheville comprehensive plan for those bits of information. So if you ever need a little quick sheet of which one I'm talking about, just take a look at the bottom left or the top right. So as Tristan was kind of mentioning, we're kind of trying to get ahead of a lot of the conversations before these projects kind of go further down the pipe. Both of these corridors have been previously submitted for projects within the spot process, but we also are aware of that both of these corridors have been called out in the Asheville in Motion plan. So that one specifically said, hey, these corridors are regionally significant. We need to do further studies, and this is exactly what these corridor studies are, is those further studies. We know that it's a major retail employment centers for areas and communities within Asheville, but we also are aware that these two corridors are a bit different. We're kind of expecting Tunnel to have an increased amount of turnover and change in the near future. Meanwhile, Hendersonville Road has been growing kind of gangbusters and has a lot of development pressures kind of pressing in on that roadway corridor. So both of these corridor studies are those community conversations and to recommend what potentials can kind of move forward. And to give you a bit more background on each one of these studies is that each corridor had its own consultant team working on this. So Hendersonville Road was led by Stantec. It kicked off in early May of 2020. And the Tunnel Road corridor study was led by Kittleson and Associates in Transportation Planning and Design. It followed about a month afterwards within the time schedule, but both of these were $175,000 projects, with the majority of the funding coming through federal funds. And while we are both going to be talking about them as corridors, they're actually fairly different in their physical makeup. So there's actually a pretty big difference between the two. Hendersonville Road was a much larger corridor to study, and it has a much larger population base within its context area. In addition, kind of the growth pressures on Hendersonville Road and the corridor in general, it has a lot higher vehicle and volume happening. And we've been seeing that, we having a traffic increase 50% within the last 15 years, making it one of the busiest and more congested corridors in our region. In comparison, Tunnel Road within the study is actually a much smaller segment. In addition, it only has 240 residents. And while Hendersonville Road has been growing significantly, Tunnel Road's been kind of seeing a different trend. So its traffic volume is about a third, a half to a third, and traffic volumes have actually been steady to slightly decreasing. I will put an asterisk to that because unfortunately I-240 has been absorbing a lot more of that growth. As a result of the different natures of both of these corridors, the consultants team provided kind of a different outreach process for both. Hendersonville Road kind of provided more of what I would call a broadcast outreach process with the community. They actually did a large online survey and held 2 very large public kind of come one, come all meetings, as well as they held 6 visioning and design meetings in fall of 2020. So they had a numerous amount of meetings as well as focus group meetings, but considerably smaller amount than Tunnel Road. Tunnel Road, with its kind of smaller kind of population base within, actually took a different approach. And granted, both of these studies took place during kind of the 2020 COVID realities at the time. However, they had a much more extensive stakeholder and focus group sessions. So whereas Hendersonville Road had about 36 stakeholders, Tunnel Road had about 70. In addition, they conducted a NCDOT field walk in September of 2020, actually about almost a year ago, where we walked the entire corridor within the project. And then finally, they rounded things out with that large public meeting at the end to present the findings and take additional feedback. So both of these projects kind of took place and kind of experimented differently with kind of how do we conduct public engagement during 2020. So I provided 2 examples up here where the bottom left, you have kind of this huge kind of concept board where Hendersonville Road literally threw everything up on the wall, so to speak, and invited everybody to come see it. Meanwhile, on the right there, you can see Tunnel Road's list of stakeholders and focus group participants, and they had several follow-up conversations with a large group of those owners as well. So, but one thing that kind of came back as a whole, if we're going to say, okay, what are the conditions on these corridors, is that, well, physically they have a lot of the same type of automobile-dependent infrastructure and traits. There is a lot of turning movements between both of these. They along these corridors from vehicular traffic. It's kind of a very busy segments. They have, they have kind of issues with both either fragmented and limited pedestrian infrastructure, limited to no bicycle infrastructure. And while transit exists on both corridors, the transit connectivity can be a bit of a challenge. And what this results in is to both of these corridors function very poorly, even as an automobile kind of dictated corridor. But at the same time, there is significant multimodal challenges within their current conditions. And a result of that is that both of these corridors kind of stick out as sore thumbs, that are out of character with how the city kind of envisions these corridors to exist in the future. And so here are some visual representations. With Hendersonville on the left, you can kind of see that, businesses openly acknowledge that the left turn to enter a particular parcel is a is a struggle. Meanwhile, you can see that while there might be crosswalks at busy intersections, they lead to little to no pedestrian infrastructure. Meanwhile, on Tunnel Road, you do have a higher amount of legacy kind of sidewalk infrastructure that's narrow. Conditions might be very poor at best, and that the conditions are still predominantly geared towards kind of automobiles kind of entering and exiting the corridor. And as a result, what we see within the safety findings is that both of these corridors have a lot more crashes than expected for their given road types. And it's not just, say, automobile crashes or sideswipes or rear ends, is that we've also tracked kind of pedestrian and bicycle crashes along this area, and both of them have major safety concerns. So when we're kind of looking at this safety data and we're incorporating within the studies, don't compare the two corridors against each other. The data doesn't quite work that way. It wasn't done in the same way. But at the same time, we can kind of show that, hey, there's some significant safety challenges no matter who you are if you're working along these corridors. And we even dug a little bit deeper. So if you have a little bit more of the safety questions or concerns, feel free to ask questions. We can kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the safety questions, but we are looking at not just that there are crashes or the types of crashes. It's actually something that we've been kind of pulling in kind of more of a holistic way, to the point where we can even look at some of our transit data and start tracking, pedestrian crashes happening near transit stops. So we started laying some of both the safety findings with the transit findings, and I don't think it's of any surprise to some folks like Hendersonville Road, where transit service is relatively limited, long headways. There's a lot of travel time to move along this corridor. But at the same time, say, Tunnel Road actually has some fairly decent transit options. You can kind of see how the usage is increasing as you're approaching downtown, as frequency also increases. So we started laying some of those, and then finally we took some market findings as well. So as I was saying earlier, Hendersonville Road is experiencing a lot of growth. However, at the same time, it's relatively what the consultants called a firm situation, where we're not expecting a lot of, a lot of the parcels to turn over rapidly. There's a few ripe spots for our development opportunities, but for the most part, what we have in Tunnel Road from the next foreseeable short-term, mid-term future is kind of what we're going to have looking forward. On the other hand, Tunnel Road's a little bit more ripe for redevelopment. It does, I think at this point in time, with both the mall redevelopment and Innsbrook, that you're starting to see that, folks are going to be looking at this as a place for redevelopment opportunities. And so we've taken kind of some of the safety elements. We took some of the transit elements. We've taken the redevelopment options, and then we kind of layered them within also what their existing plans are going to be proposing for this quarter. So we're now saying, okay, what we know of the existing conditions, now let's layer in Asheville's comprehensive plan to see, okay, what is the land use going to kind of dictate? And then that is going to what the comprehensive plan is calling out is what's going to say, okay, what type of transportation infrastructure do we need to plan for and accommodate to make the comprehensive plan to fold out appropriately. So stepping back, looking at the recommendations of a glance. Both of these corridor studies kind of focus on safety, multimodal interconnectivity, and different options and alternatives moving forward. So neither of these studies are saying that there is like only one option. They're going to provide kind of a few different considerations, although we do kind of look at the pros and cons of a few items. Both of these studies are constrained by physical design, mode, and mobility limitations. So this is not a kind of a Christmas list dream. This is a wish list dream where we can kind of step back and say, okay, what is our budget? What is realistic that we can propose that we can start to move forward? Of course, we're adapting existing plans, and both corridors are trying to transition from a automobile dependent and an automobile necessity to kind of a more multimodal corridors. However, they are going to kind of differentiate themselves a little bit. Tunnel Road is going to have a much bigger focus on redevelopment. It's going to look to transition from a regional automobile dependent to more local multimodal use. It's going to require a bit more of a grid. A grid is going to be key for Tunnel Road. Meanwhile, Hendersonville Road is going to be focused more of what can we do within the right-of-way. It's going to be trying to balance and transition from a regional commuter track to a place that actually has an identity of its own and kind of facilitate that transition. It's also going to be doing a grid development, but it's also going to acknowledge the difference between the road and the corridor. So there's going to be a little bit kind of happening with Hendersonville Road where we're going to kind of focus on and all that. So here we are at Hendersonville Road. So we're applying kind of the urban and town center context zones within this area. And one of the things that kind of what the consultants took out from this is that while there is specific urban and town centers kind of drawn as a dot, one of the recommendations that says actually there's more of just a larger zone that we need to consider for and really address within the road and network in and of itself. And while there aren't specific urban or town centers identified at the northern and southern end, they're getting kind of close to other ones that are proposed within the plan. And so what they're saying is we don't necessarily need to go full urban design here. We can kind of take a step back, but still produce something where the road and the area around it are accommodating to future kind of urbanizations along those specific points. So between kind of just south of the Blue Ridge Parkway to Long Shoals Road, we're really proposing kind of a full kind of urban context zones. And a lot of the recommendations are going to be flowing from that. When I say urban context zones, what I'm focusing here on is one, we're going to be keeping within the right of way of Hendersonville Road for its recommendations on the road itself. However, within the corridor, it's looking at actually improving kind of grid connectivity. It's identifying some of both the constraints from the lack of interconnectivity, and there is actually a major kind of challenge there because the ability to kind of get between, say, Sweeten Creek and Hendersonville Road, if there is any accident or an issue on there, there's no connectivity within certain spots. So its recommendation is to promote and increase interconnectivity within that, increase interparcel connectivity. But on the road itself, what it's looking to do is trying to control a lot of the lane movements. So in this case, you're going to have only left turns at specific intersections, and those intersections are going to get a much larger kind of pedestrian treatment and options available made to them, as well as not only improving pedestrian access to it, also promoting that 10-foot multi-use path along the western side of the road, although that path goes the entire length of the corridor. And so what does that kind of look like to the end user? One, it's going to control a lot of the left turns. And I think that's going to be an important consideration that kind of focuses how this corridor comes, because there's a lot of user conflicts as a result. In addition, some of the pedestrian improvements, pedestrian islands, just offering the option of a multi-use path on the western side would actually create some better options for those who are trying to move along the corridor. And even then, stepping back into kind of the area around the corridor is just making sure that you have that interconnectivity, the pedestrian access within the parcels themselves. So it's kind of stepping out behind that. In the transitional stages, it's kind of dialed back a little bit. So in some cases where there is a break in, say, the ability for pedestrians or others to cross, they are proposing halt signalizations. They're keeping a lot of the planted medians within this area, but at the same time, depending on kind of the land use and parcels around it, it's not necessarily as hard of a requirement as it is in the urban context zones. So we're still getting the 10-foot multi-use path, but it's kind of building its way towards being kind of more that urban context zone without requiring the full urban context zone treatments. And finally, they kind of gave us a potential cost estimate. And so what they propose in improvements to this, and they really tried to stick to the right-of-way, although they acknowledge that that's not going to be 100% can-do thing. There might be items that require to step outside, but we're probably looking at about $23 million in 2020 or 2021 dollars. Of course, cost increases are happening, but that was some of the things I said, okay, what can we realistically do and provide for an appropriate cost that will turn kind of Henderson Road from that 5-lane wild west of automobile use into something that's a lot more accommodating rather than being a barrier to multimodal use. So, moving on to Tunnel Road. Again, we are applying the urban and town centers approach to this. So again, Tunnel Road kind of calls out both an urban center kind of at the intersection of Tunnel and South Tunnel, as well as that would be a town center, and then an urban center up towards where towards where the tunnel currently is on the eastern side of the mountain there. But we will acknowledge that there's also another urban center that would be proposed kind of just south of Swananoa River Road as well. So we're cognizant of it. It's just outside the boundary, but that's something in the back of our minds as we're doing this. So as I kind of said briefly earlier, the main kind of linchpin of the Tunnel Road Corridor Study is developing its grid network, and particularly a north-south road probably on the western side of the existing tunnel road that extends as basically a parallel road. Right now, what our options and availabilities kind of in our no-build scenario of if we don't do anything to Tunnel Road, it's not great. But even if we can address a lot of the things on Tunnel Road, all of a sudden, a lot of our options really kind of bloom when we say, okay, if we can have an additional road. And quietly, a lot of that connectivity is kind of there. It's a lot of, particularly in the north section, it's just kind of open parking lot or in kind of connectivity between a couple of parcels where it's privately held. But if we can formalize this, then all of a sudden the options and available considerations for Tunnel Road kind of bloom exponentially. So when we talk about kind of a parallel road, we're looking really at like a 2-lane street that's kind of close in and readily available for development. So it's not going to be something that is like another 4-lane road to the left. I think sometimes that was a worry that we were building another tunnel road. But what that does then allow is probably something that is going to be very interesting for anybody on the multimodal group, is that anytime I can say that, hey, let's consider a road diet and a recommendation coming forward, that's going to be significant. So one of the recommendations coming out of this is to actually create a road diet kind of on the northern section of Tunnel Road and drop it to 2 lanes with a turn lane. And if we can do that, you can see a lot more improvements coming on. As I said, Tunnel Road's been seeing a decrease in traffic volume. Some of the volumes that we're currently seeing now, we could actually, from about exit 6 north, accommodate a road diet to 2 lanes at that point in time. Now, conditions improve for basically all users if we can get that parallel road working, but that's something that is an option available. And although we're doing some the road diet analysis was done and it looks promising, we also did some spot identifications for specific intersections where there will be concerns. Because one of the things that we heard from our DOT partners that said is like, hey, we can do a lot and everything, but the one requirement, one rule is that we cannot impact traffic backing up onto 240. So we did take a look at each one of these exit intersections and kind of came from that. And one of the recommendations for options available is, hey, that exit 6 option at Chuns Cove Road, that could actually be a roundabout potential there, working within the road diet option. Further down, kind of looking at that intersection, kind of closer to exit 7, this was one of those other kind of corridor intersections that we needed to address. And there's a couple ones. We did look at a roundabout in this particular area, but it was not a, I don't think it performed very well. And two other alternatives potentially, depending on whether or not we can get a parallel road kind of did. So on the left, you kind of have something that is actually working kind of within the existing context of the road that can improve kind of the flow of that intersection, as well as kind of looking to another, the kind of slowly adapting that grid overlay where you're reducing kind of the travel lanes that have to cross each other, as well as that would make it a lot easier for pedestrians and other multimodal users to get across. Because I don't know if many people have walked that corridor, but if you're coming from Tunnel Road, say on the other side of the intersection, you basically have to walk kind of to the smoothie shop, walk south on South Tunnel Road, cross the road 3 times, and then to continue north along Tunnel Road. It's not a very useful option, and as a result, you see a lot of goat paths where folks are taking that risk. So getting back to it is looking at the different options, and this is kind of a, hey, we looked at how level of service happened with the existing conditions, if we worked only within the right-of-way of Tunnel Road, if we can kind of get the parallel road with redevelopment and other opportunities. And for the most part, we can kind of take a road diet fairly well south up until kind of that I-240 off-ramp just before it starts coming up into kind of exit 7. So not quite down that far south, where at that point in time, we're still probably looking at least a 4-lane cross section, but that's kind of more of a option that's kind of driven by that interstate interchange there. And so those were kind of different options that we're looking moving forward. And so you start seeing these cross sections develop where, you know, existing, we have that 3-4 lane kind of thing right before the tunnel. We can actually work within the existing right of way to provide kind of that separated multi-use path. And with redevelopment, we can actually kind of expand some of those options that make the multimodal experience a lot better. Closer to the off-ramp, you're seeing the very similar condition. So at Chun's Cove and that off-ramp, we can still kind of keep things narrow, keep it kind of more of a pedestrian multi-user scale rather than 4-lane highway there. But once we get kind of further south, that's when we're seeing that probably Tunnel Road is still going to kind of exist as a 4-lane road, at least at that particular point. Depending on how redevelopment happens, you know, there could be other options, but that's at least what kind of the data was pointing towards at that situation. So kind of as a whole, to kind of make all these work, the consultants on both ends kind of provided a lot of different options. The one key takeaway here was that to make this happen and to make it happen in kind of a established timeline is that kind of all parties need to work together for this. The city itself needs to have kind of what one consultant said was skin in the game. So it's not just a mandate, you must include this kind of type. There actually has to be something, particularly for Hendersonville Road, where there is less of an incentive for a developer to change because they're already kind of, it's invested in firm at that point in time. But on Tunnel Road, there kind of needs to be kind of a, you know, a proposed case example of saying, this is how we can kind of move forward to kind of create this network, because we're going to need developer and private property owner buy-in to kind of make a lot of these options available. And that, you know, even with kind of constrained funding mechanisms, that we can do a lot, but if we really want to maximize kind of the options of turning these from automobile dependent kind of through corridors into actually places of their own, it's going to require a little bit more. So that's where I'll leave things. If folks have any questions, you can contact me at john@landesky.org, or you can also just email mpo@landesky.org, or just ask them here, or give me, you know, reach out however you please. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions. I know a couple popped up, but I actually can't see the comment section while I'm presenting. So I'm gonna close this, but I can open it back up if folks need.
Great, thanks, John. I'm sure we have a bunch of questions. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I've got one.
If no one else wants to, Okay.
All right.
Go ahead, Michael.
So I was just curious, was there any thought to incorporating like rapid transit into any of this mix in terms of like dedicated lanes for buses?
Yes. So this is kind of where the interesting direction where COVID hit us, along with the rollout of changes to the ART system a few months prior before these kicked out. I mean, at this point in time, we didn't want to pull COVID numbers for our transit analysis. And, at this point in time, it would be May or June. It wouldn't have been a great idea. So rather than trying to say, hey, this is what changes we need to make deep into transit through rapid transit or whatnot, at that case, we'll probably lean more on the transit master plans for their recommendations. We don't want to make a recommendation kind of like straight out the gate there. But we did kind of take some considerations and say, hey, we had conversations with groups about light rail and other options. I think it was just at that time, and when the study was done, it was in the back of our minds, but we also didn't want to, make a recommendation before kind of post-COVID improvements to the ART transit happened. So that would be something that we would probably just kind of lean back on the transit master plan for.
Yeah, I would just add to that there is a quick mention of bus rapid transit. We did get a comment during the studies process about it. But as John said, it wouldn't be the place for this corridor study to kind of usurp the transit master plan. We incorporated the transit master plan's recommendations, but we did not, make plans for something well outside the bounds of that plan.
I can go next. Can you help me understand the road diet? I think we generally as a group are always really excited about road diets. But when I'm thinking about it in this application, I don't understand who we're really moving. If the diet stops at the tunnel, which we're constricted by space there, and it doesn't really reach the areas where I feel like the most development or the addition of new people will come through, maybe some type of shelter or some redevelopment at the mall, who are we actually moving through that road diet, and where are we moving them to?
Well, I would say it kind of depends. So one, we see kind of a vehicular volume drop if you're looking at this quarter for the vehicle volumes, the highest it is kind of at exit 7 along Tunnel Road, and South Tunnel Road's fairly high. When I say fairly high, it's around 20,000 vehicles a day for Tunnel Road. Then it drops to just over 12,000 by the time it hits the tunnel. So what we're seeing kind of just around the exit 6 on-ramp, off-ramps area is that it's really servicing local traffic rather than regional traffic. I think by that point in time, a lot of the users are either funneling off onto commercial establishments along Tunnel and South Tunnel Road, or funneling into, say, the Kenilworth community and kind of those places. So on one hand, kind of where on the northern section, we're dealing more with that this is kind of its own local local entity, and those are the individuals that were moved. There might be some kind of through traffic from downtown into kind of the Tunnel Road corridor, but for the most part, we're seeing a bigger drop. So at that point in time with the road diet, we don't have the volumes to kind of require the 4 or 5 lane roads, or at least it doesn't stop a road diet, I should say. At the same time, as if you start improving some of the interconnectivity between both the parcels as well as that grid network, the parallel road, what you almost kind of do is create a north-south route for locals, the residents who are going to be using the commercial establishments as, they're, going to the grocery store or, going to a restaurant along that corridor, but they now have a local road to the west, whereas kind of say the large amount of, I would say, more regional traffic, including those that are maybe making use of the hotels, folks visiting the area, have their own, rather than everybody having to kind of come out to Tunnel Road, drive a few hundred yards, and then exit back in. You're starting to get that grid connectivity where you don't need, that 4 lanes of traffic volume trying to move things at specific times. We do have to be cognizant of kind of seasonal traffic along this, just because it's a large commercial corridor and it still has its peaks in the holiday shopping season. But beyond that, you can actually start looking at this as more of a neighborhood community section rather than, say, a large shopping mall, depending on where you are on Tunnel Road.
Hey, John, this is Christy. I don't know if you'd want me to chime in here since
Absolutely.
I'm listening in. Just for folks that, this corridor, when we studied it, that recommendation for the road diet kind of evolved from 3 really key factors. One is safety. And I'm sure you all know, trying to make a left turn from that inside lane where people are barreling over the hill, can't see you, is really unsafe. So there's a section there where the crash rates are really high. So anytime, like a road diet is actually a crash modification factor. It's a reduction method to improve safety. So that's a huge part of the recommendation in that section. And then 2, we knew there's just really no way to fit in bike lanes and any kind of multimodal by expanding the roadway footprint in this corridor. So it's really more of a creative way to do a road diet, but instead of putting bike lanes in, reproportion that roadway to give the extra width to a trail on one side. So it's a shared facility. So it really was just a way to, 1, how do we put multimodal in this corridor, and 2, how do we fix the safety issues, knowing that it's just a really constrained corridor. So I don't know if that's helpful at all.
Definitely. Yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Tristan?
I have a follow-up.
Sorry, I was just going to echo Christy's statements that, it's road diets are a proven crash reduction factor, usually around a 15 to 30% reduction in all crashes based on FHWA's research. And so for us, there's vehicular safety. For pedestrian safety, there's a reduction in threat from what's called multi-threat collisions. That's where pedestrians are crossing multiple lanes of traffic and may not be able to see cars coming from another lane. And honestly, for bike infrastructure, I think for East Asheville, I think this is kind of a starting point in this area, and that more connections would need to follow.
Okay, great. Yeah, I really like that idea. And I just didn't understand kind of how it fit in, but I think that makes complete sense. I like the idea of slowing folks down there as well. If I can ask a question about the parallel path, and I think it's a keen observation. I go to that Ingalls from Kenilworth, and so there's actually already a little bit of a path that we all take and kind of cobble together, cutting through parking lots and that type of thing. And so I like this idea. One of the challenges is that it pretty much needs to be accessed by Kenilworth Road, or there's like one other spot you can kind of get in there. Do you see these? When we talk about that connectivity to the neighborhood and moving those folks from the neighborhood, and maybe even minimizing vehicular trips by giving that access, do you see that secondary road and these other paths having cuts into the neighborhoods a little bit more frequently? How does that kind of work, and how does it intersect with the the adjoining neighborhoods, both on Tunnel Road and in the idea of the Hendersonville Road?
Okay, so yes, as you kind of mentioned, they are kind of, this parallel road kind of already exists in sections, but at this point in time, there's kind of limited to no guarantee that those existence would continue. So through redevelopment, you could actually see those potentially disappear. Kind of connecting back into some of the neighborhoods. So if you're coming off of Kenilworth Road, or some of the other kind of roads that kind of connect in between. I know that we did listen to White Pine. They were a little bit concerned about interconnectivity into Kenilworth Forest neighborhood. But yeah, we would expect that there'll be increased connectivity with the neighborhood. And in addition, it wouldn't require everybody to pick 1 or 2 kind of intersections to both enter and exit out of Kenilworth neighborhood to that left there. So, if there is like more traffic at one location or a crash, you would actually have options of being able to enter and exit. And through additional kind of that redevelopment connectivity, we will have better pedestrian access just through the sidewalks through those property, or through through these adjoining grid networks. So you'll build out that pedestrian grid. And I think that those would actually keep kind of traffic volumes relatively low, as far as making it more comfortable for other non-vehicular users to get in and out of that area. Was that what you were kind of getting at?
Sorry, Tristan, go ahead.
I was going to say one of my favorite graphics from our consultant team is just highlighting the importance of building that network and how that influences pedestrian activity. It kind of shows, here's your downtown. It's very, pedestrian friendly for the most part. There's a lot of pedestrian activity, and a lot of that that research points out is that it's because there's a lot of connectivity. There's a fairly well-established grid. Once we get further out of downtown, especially in this area, that's something we don't have. And so that's part of the backbone of this recommendation is getting more of a grid network in there and helping to build out something that's more conducive to pedestrian movements.
Okay, thanks. And just one more follow-up, and then I'll pass it along. Are there established best practices where there are these cut-throughs or these access points that are just bike ped and not vehicle traffic, or is that not a good plan?
That's a good question. That was something that we had discussions with a few of the neighborhood community groups coming up of whether or not they wanted or didn't want that type of access. I think we would could or potentially, at future times say, okay, we know that we're going to have this kind of redevelopment and connection. At that point in time, engage the community and say, hey, do you want this bike ped only infrastructure? I do think that was a discussion with Biltmore Forest, particularly with the mall, of whether or not to have kind of additional access to amenities if that redevelops in a particular way at a specific time. I think that's just one of those things that as those kind of redevelopment happens, we can kind of explore that, but be, a next step conversation to have.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would say we wouldn't want to preclude that at this time, but I wouldn't want to minimize the benefits of kind of diluting traffic throughout the network and how that can kind of open up opportunities on other roads.
Definitely. Yeah, I can see where the obviously the thought is that we can drop some vehicle trips down, but then there's some concern about other folks using that as access points, and there's some inherent issues with that corridor and that some of the neighborhoods. So I can see where the challenge or the rub is, but I'm glad it's at least on the table. Randy?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I turned my camera off because I was getting the signal a little bit broken up. First of all, thanks so much, John and Tristan, for all the work that you and everybody else has done on this project, these two projects, and the other one, Biltmore McDowell as well. And it's a lot of work, and it's definitely going to move things in the right direction. It's just, it's a lot of those places are, especially Hendersonville Road. That's the street I live very close to, and it's very challenging. And so we appreciate all this work. I do have a couple questions and then some comments about some things. One is I noticed things like on page 8, when it talks about the plans listed, they looked at and were referenced in the report. For this is the Hendersonville Road study. And then they don't mention the bike plan, but then on page 11, the bike plan is referenced. So just things like that. I'm not sure. Do I just send you an email about those kind of things? Because it's just not accurately reported in the report. So it's just an editing thing. Is that the proper venue to get to those kind of things? Is just to email you those?
Yeah, if you email me those, I can address those. Works.
And then one thing I wonder about too is we talked a lot about context-sensitive speed limits on Hendersonville Road in one of the public meetings I was at, and I didn't see it in my look through the report. I'm wondering, is that addressed someplace where Hendersonville Road, when you drive when it's busy there, or during business hours, 45 miles an hour through the parts that have a lot of businesses is completely inappropriate speed limit. There's no way you can go 45 miles an hour through there safely. But in the middle of the night, 45 is perfectly acceptable. So we talked a lot about how the speed limit should probably be course, we said 35, but really it should be probably 25, during the busy times of the day, and then maybe 45 during non-busy times. Is that addressed in the report at all?
Yes, actually, within the urban context zones, the consultants did recommend a 35 mile an hour speed limit within that as something that we could do relatively quick and easily. We actually had further conversations, particularly with NCDOT, about further speed reductions, and that is somewhat kind of dependent on both redevelopment. We want to make sure that the land use and road treatments can kind of reflect that, and make sure that we're just not surprising, say, users with 25 mile an hour. But that was actually something that DOT was amenable to, is once the kind of redevelopment starts happening, and kind of what we were talking about with Hendersonville Road and its population, it's becoming a node in and of itself, where it actually has its own kind of transportation gravity of where you see flow coming towards it and then decreasing as it moves away, kind of as a downtown Asheville or a downtown Hendersonville. So that there are actually more and additional options that, where the speed can be dropped even further as that corridor kind of builds out as a town center. So.
And it is like, they talk a lot about the dynamic speed limits where they'd have a video board in the speed limits. And I know this is a relatively new idea, but it is being done in a lot of different places now, where the speed limit would actually change during the day, depending upon how busy it was.
That is not something that we looked at. I don't know if any of the engineers that we have on hand know a little bit more, but normally for that, I thought that a lot of the dynamic speed limits often include more of a weather kind of road condition item, but I don't know if it's been applied in kind of just a traffic volume situation, at least on this type of road.
I know in Europe for sure, but I can't point to a specific example here, but it is something that's certainly in Germany, they're using it a lot, and in the Netherlands and stuff. But okay, so it's not like we haven't necessarily looked at that. So I have a question too about like Overlook Road. So actually on the plan there, it says climbing lane, which is what I think the bike plan calls for, which is actually completely inappropriate treatment, because that's the only way to get to T.C. Robertson, Estes, Kuntz, all that, the whole school complex there, and not to have, and I know there's supposed to be sidewalks the whole way, but not to have a dedicated bike lane along that road the whole way is just, unconscionable for all those neighborhoods that live there. But are you saying that this plan is not the place for that to be recommended? That'd be a revised bike plan? Is that the place that we should address that issue?
Are you looking for, so for Overlook itself, correct?
Yeah.
No,
yeah.
Okay.
So Overlook right now.
I'll make a note.
Okay.
Well, I know that we.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
But yeah, so if you live any of those neighborhoods, which are busting with kids all over those neighborhoods, right now you have to drive the kids, a half a mile. And I know they're putting sidewalks in right now for another little bit of it, and the plan is for that. But really, I mean, and I know that there's going to be a buffer bike lane plan for long shoals, which is great as well. But there's thousands of kids that live in those neighborhoods, and having a bike lane offers an option for people to not take their car for those roads, which is backed up every single day like crazy. So it's really something that needs to be, I think, in the plan. But I just don't know if this is the place it should be there, or if it should be. I thought you were saying maybe before that you were just implementing the plans that were already out there. So maybe it shouldn't be in this plan, but it should be in the revision of the 2008 bike plan, which is long overdue.
I would quietly say indirectly it's kind of there, but I would say it's in a very hidden spot. So at least with the multi-use path and our consultants, they were looking more at Hendersonville Road in and of itself. But at the same time, within its urban context zones, it does call out that, a 10-foot multi-use path, I believe it's there, is actually called out for within there, and at least a section, within the study area of Overlook Road, that could be a potential. It's there in the most indirect ways, but that wasn't something that our consultants looked at as far as extending back down Overlook at that particular location. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, just like, if the 10-foot multi-use trail gets involved on Hendersonville Road, and then it dumps you out in an overlook where you have to fight traffic, then it's not really going to help people get to school. So it's just, it would be making a more incomplete part of the network. It's just a crucial piece of the puzzle for things. So I just wanted to address somehow. So if it's not addressed in this plan, then I'll work hard to have it included in the bike plan revision, which again, it was from 2008. So that's way, way overdue being redone. So, but if this is the appropriate place for it, then I'd like to have it in this report, because it's right now, the drawings show that's a climbing lane only on Overlook.
Yeah, I mean, we did look at considering how the multi-use path would be connected into some other greenways. I don't know or remember anything specifically off the top of my head with Overlook, but yeah, that's something that, further things that say, hey, we should connect it to the multi-use path that's on Hendersonville Road called out in this corridor study, and you can just slowly build out the network via those plans.
And then another concern I have is the drawings. And I know I brought this up in the bike ped task force meeting, but the drawings, I don't like them because they show really wide turning radiuses. They don't show crosswalks. They're really lacking in a lot of essential details that if these are going to guide people in terms of how they're going to build things out, we want to make sure that it's just like right now, I take Hendersonville Road to the Blue Ridge Parkway to take my son to school. And you can exit off of Hendersonville Road at 45 miles an hour, and almost maintain that speed on that exit, because it's an exit. It's not, and that's going to be crossing that multi-use trail. And the drawings show that turning radius to be the exact same. And so we're and I know that you said in the bike ped task force that yes, this is just a guide and not specific designs, and people will have to revisit those when they actually design it. But I think as a guide, even though we should be providing people with the safest possible options, which is a 90-degree turn, I think there, because trucks are not going to make that turn. There's no commercial vehicles allowed on the parkway, so it should be a turn where people have to slow down as much as possible to cross that 10-foot multi-use trail, so that they minimize the dangers for that. And then and it's all over the place on that corridor. The turning radiuses are terrible. And then I noticed too, there's just not crosswalks marked. There's a lot of places there are crosswalk marked, but there's a lot of places there aren't, where there's sidewalks. And so the drawings just aren't very good that way. I wonder, how can we possibly make these drawings better before we get this plan fully approved?
Okay, well, at least I know that our consultants did look at making some changes of how Hendersonville Road kind of interacts with the Blue Ridge Parkway there, particularly taking out some of the left turns potentials depending on which direction it goes. And yeah, that's actually an important thing, kind of both a blessing and a curse through the Hendersonville Road Corridor project, is that, yeah, they really tried to produce some designs, and although they're supposed to be conceptual, they really do start diving down into those details. And so that's one of the things that we have to kind of come back and at least step back and say that these are still conceptual. I hate to use it, but it's like a concept car. Granted, concept cars might not have door handles on it. That's a design feature they're going to figure out later. But, as far as they get further down and along in the development, what design elements they're going to keep and what they might not. What they're doing is just recommending specific types of treatments as available options, and giving kind of a concept of how these would look, particularly to the end user, just to show that, say, for the kind of the general public user, that this is how it's going to potentially look. Although a lot of the engineers, more of the specific items, it's going to take a lot more of a deep dive to kind of get to that point.
Yeah, and I certainly understand that, but a 200-page document and people flipping through things, I know that the engineers will be much more specific about it too. But as a guiding principle, I mean, I'd much rather have the engineer look at something that is how we want it to be than look at something that is not how we don't want it to be. Because we know that a lot of these projects aren't going to be done for 15, 20 years. And we're not going to be here anymore. And well, maybe we will, but maybe not. But the chances for us to sit down and have them say, I know this design doesn't show this turning radius being decreased, but increased. But we really want this. That was the intention of it. And that leads me to my last question: is that how are the comments that we make today and the Bike Ped Task Force made and everybody else making, how are they traveling with this plan? How are they being attached to the plan so that they can see these kind of comments or concerns we had in 15, 20 years when they start working on these plans? Are these comments somehow going to travel with the plan?
Yeah, we're actually, I'm taking notes and going to be adopting or augmenting them to the plan as amendments. So, for example, I know there was a problematic image that we're going to be removing, but in other items where folks make a specific comment or about a treatment or whatnot, we're going to say, hey, so, I won't say so-and-so, but it was commented that, we should look at, say, turning distances and radiuses for some of the images on Hendersonville Road. So that would warrant additional analysis.
That makes me feel better. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Randy.
And thanks again for all your work. I mean, these are nitpicky things. Overall, just the fact that we're saying that these should be multimodal transportation corridors is huge. And I so appreciate your work on that.
Definitely. Maggie?
Hey, I kind of have two comments. One is more like big picture and doesn't necessarily need a response unless you have the data or information at hand. And it's just kind of a reflection of where we are in the community on redevelopment in general. And it's just, we have so much fantastic planning and such challenge in people remembering those plans. And a lot of folks, we are the nerds who like to do those plans and participate, but we really just don't reflect the community. And so just really curious about what the racial makeup was of participation in public engagement. Do we offer stipends for lived experience? Like, I just have a fear that this tremendous work was not fully inclusive, not because I doubt y'all, but because that's our habit here. And that just really runs a risk of this being like pie in the sky and then hitting the community, whether it's by racial breakdown or just full inclusion, and hitting the community and never really absorbing past the planners that we are. So I guess that's just, I don't expect y'all to do anything with that, but would love if you had any thoughts. But I just feel like I need to say that because it makes me worried when I get so dang excited seeing something like this. And then I'm like, oh, right, let's go to a council meeting when we're talking about redevelopment and feel what it's like now. So the second actual question is some like checking, like, did I hear this right? Because I'll admit I was multitasking. Y'all are talking about goals of creating a grid network around tunnel, which would include like a second road with cars so that you have gridding. Okay. And that some of the road diet concept is for those multiple goals, as Christy was mentioning, of safety, always love it. And that I guess so. Safety is one of the major ones. And that the corridor is like pretty narrow, and so it's tricky to add multimodal unless we reduce lanes. One of my questions is, if we're like dreaming up a second road, I would love to understand the planner judgment call that would say the multimodal would stay on Tunnel Road versus this more neighborhood feeder road. Like, I never go on Merriman, even if we get a road diet, and I surely hope we do. Like, Liberty's lovely. So I'm just kind of curious about the rationale there to be educated, because I'm sure there was an intelligent intellectual purpose. And then the second question is like, maybe this is also me being naive or just like asking to be schooled in your practice, is like, we're talking about building a second road. Does that strike anyone else as like really far from a reality? Like, I get it that this is like 15 years out and that we have to think in our landscape that way, but like, I literally can't understand how that would work. All the property's used up. So is that like Big Lots finally closes their doors, someone buys it to redevelop, they cede us the last sliver, and then we hold on to that until we have enough slivers to make a road? So it's kind of like, in the world of planning, is like, I don't know. I'm not even going to preface it. Like, those are my reactions and responses, and curious for anyone to riff or educate me on any of that.
I'm happy to jump in if y'all think that would be helpful. Okay.
Go for on the tunnel road.
Yeah. So first of all, the secondary road on Tunnel Road is a huge stretch, and you are 100% accurate.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better to be like, I'm not out of sync here.
There are some massive physical constraints, and it would require an effort that is, public-private partnership. You'd have to have all the landowners on board. I think the theory and the way it was investigated is slowly we could build out a grid network with interconnectivity between sites. And so we can achieve it slowly over time. And so don't just give up on it because it's going to be hard. So it's in the plan. We need secondary frontage roads. We're done developing developments that cut off at the edge of their property and you can't drive. You have to go out onto a main road to get into the next property, right? So we need to be thinking. So it's really setting the stage for that. But I think that is also why you see the multimodal network on Tunnel Road, because that's a quick, achievable thing. And then in addition, even if there was a secondary road and it was easy, you still need to be able to get to the businesses on Tunnel Road. So you would need it in both locations. So there's a number of ways to look at that. But I think certainly if you all watch people bike up Tunnel Road in the wrong lane, and people that need it and are trying to get to transit are really putting themselves in a tough position.
Danger.
Yeah.
And so I love having a vision that is too big for my britches. I like that and I appreciate it and I hear that. The question then is in a pragmatic sense, does that change our recommendations for the corridor if that just never comes together? Because I get the grid network, but it seems like a bunch of these waterfalled towards each other, or it doesn't. Okay. So
we ran the traffic to show, and the things that really are critical to getting the road diet to work is to improving efficiencies of what's there now. So a lot of those roads come in and the side roads are offset. And so the signal timings are really weird. And there's a lot of lost time. So if they could get those aligned and do some spot intersection improvements, it opens up the road diet option.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Joe, I just pulled up Tunnel Road for you. You had a comment. I'm going to go back on some of your other questions, Maggie, as well.
Yeah, and I think... Oh, go ahead, Christy.
I was going to say, just to address Maggie's comment on kind of who we involved. I can't speak to Hendersonville Road, but Tunnel Road was a little bit of a funny way to go about addressing kind of our equity concerns, where there are not a lot of people who live along the corridor. And in fact, pretty much the only people who live along the corridor, with the exception of the one condo unit, is Asheville Terrace. And then there are concerns kind of beyond our study area, like on Wood Avenue and along there. So what we did is kind of took a backwards approach to it, where it was kind of involving providers of getting better buses together. Homeward Bound was a huge advocate throughout the whole corridor study, and trying to get people who are interested in affordable housing and kind of understanding, what would it take for you to develop here. So it wasn't as much of an effort as going out to the neighbors to represent that community, because those neighbors are not there. It is bringing people together of who could be the neighbors on this corridor and how do we think about it. So it was a little bit backwards than things that we have normally done. But to assure you that we thought through some of the equity implications, we did do that. And I think there's a kind of a sentiment about this corridor being prime for affordable housing because of its proximity to jobs, because of its proximity to downtown. And also we had a lot of conversation. I'm terrible at remembering numbers, so Caitlin and Christy, you might want to get my numbers straight. But we had, if you look at the jobs that are along Tunnel Road, they are predominantly low-income jobs. I think it was, again, this is where my numbers I never remember. So they were those jobs are below $12,000 a year, something like that. And so kind of thinking through the multimodal transportation options and improving those along that corridor kind of goes hand in hand with the workers' needs that are on that corridor. We also talked to the hotel owners to kind of understand the worker transportation needs, some of the retail service providers to understand their workers' needs and things like that. So it's not as direct if you look at the demographics, but the conversations definitely were there.
I appreciate that. And my question wasn't because I doubted y'all specifically. It's just like, I feel like every time we talk about planning, we need to be centering this.
So true.
Because
Yeah.
it's really important. And because we haven't for a long time, and because the professionals doing the work look like people with my skin color. So just like all the reasons it should be coming up. Another thought though is like how we get into the system change element of what planning does, and like talking about the workers in that corridor now and their class and their earnings, and then by proxy, you know, their race sometimes because of the way that our society is. Like, if we actually are redeveloping, how likely are those jobs actually to stay there? And what is the impact that we're creating then? And what are the amenities and the infrastructure we're building, and who are we building that for? Because as we start to redevelop, are we redeveloping for more Red Lobsters? We're probably not. So then who are going to be having the jobs in that place, and how does that relate? I understand that this is a corridor study and y'all aren't here to solve everything, but I feel like it's our obligation and responsibility as leaders doing the planning and as like advisors that like this stuff needs to be in the mix of our conversations.
This kind of lends itself to the White Pine intersection. I don't know, John, if you have a good image of that. So we identified a kind of catalyst project that could be an affordable housing partnership, and also tee up one of those intersection improvements that would open the option for the road diet above White Pine. So there were some undeveloped parcels, and we know the Days Inn has some plans there. And so we had some meetings with the city and planning staff about really thinking ahead about how, you know, what's it going to take? Yeah, you can see the blue circle on the left side of this image, and you can see a connection at White Pine and then into the mall, and then connecting to Buckstone Place. So an intersection improvement like that, you know, we had met with the city to talk about, is there some way to get the infrastructure in place, but then also for the city to purchase the land and maybe work on a private partnership for redevelopment for affordable housing or the Days Inn, things like that. So we even shifted our design to avoid impacting the Days Inn, because we found out what Homeward Bound was looking to do there. So definitely something we were thinking about. And I think there are a lot of opportunities for this on Long Tunnel Road if someone were to come through and really target certain parcels to develop the road, but also use vacant parcels or the divided parcels into developable pieces of land. So it's really going to take some leadership, but I think there's some really good opportunities here.
I appreciate y'all's feedback and thoughts and hearing into it more. I really do. Thank you.
Joe? Did we lose Joe? Probably gonna pop back on and give me a quick.
Sorry about that. I thought I hit the microphone. I just wanted to first thank Tristan and John and both the Christys and Caitlin. John and Tristan had come to Planning and Zoning last month and presented to this, and we had a really great discussion. One of the things, the reason I had asked to bring up that Innsbrook Mall kind of the image there of Tunnel Road at Innsbrook Mall is to respond to Maggie's comment about those roads. It's interesting, as I've ridden my bike, one of my routes is either coming down off of Bowcatcher headed towards Chun's Cove or vice versa. And so I've taken that, what is it? Something, I can't remember the name of it. It's right there on coming up from the bottom, something Springs Road. And actually,
Mineral Springs, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And so you actually can connect up through, people might remember when the Dollar Theater was back in there behind the Office Depot. And basically you come out right there at that intersection that leads you right into Chun's Cove. And that's kind of the example of creating these roads, because you're in a drive aisle. I mean, right now that is the road. If you're coming from Chun's Cove and you go straight through that intersection, you're in a drive aisle, but it's a road. And so part of the idea too with this urban place rezoning that is working its way through planning staff and then planning and zoning is that parcels like this would have requirements to better create these roads that in a sense already exist. So, and one of the things, and I'll kind of bouncing around a little bit, but one of the things I really appreciated and mentioned to Tristan and John when this came to planning and zoning is if everybody here at Multimodal hasn't dove into these reports, there's a lot of information, and especially on the Hendersonville Road one, I think it's page 108 or 109, where they go into recommendations of changes to the UDO to help make these things work. And I really like this because it's, the MPO is focusing on transit, obviously, but it needs to be a focus on both. You have to have the, ideas for how you want to deal with the transit. Then you have to deal with the land use and the zoning and the planning that then helps support that. And again, like this urban place, we have these drive aisles that could create a future grid network. When we get the land use and zoning in place, then it will create that future grid network. And so this idea then comes to fruition. So, it's a lot of stuff that has to happen. And again, I really just appreciate the fact that this has been included already. And just even what Christy Stout was mentioning there at White Pine, some of these intersection changes or improvements that then could lead to other parcels. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really, really great information in here. And again, just appreciate everything that all the consultants have done, and really, hope everybody can kind of get behind this for the next however long it's going to take to get these to happen. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think that's a really good point. And I think one thing our consultant team did a great job of is, even though having a new road connection is a big, big haul, I think the way it's been set up is through that kind of piecemeal, informal network that already exists today. One of the things that kind of caught our attention when we were evaluating different corridors of which ones to study was the data we pulled a few years ago showed very few crashes on South Tunnel Road. And we were kind of like, well, that's very strange. Like, what's going on there? And when we kind of pulled back, we saw, well, if you look at South Tunnel Road and kind of those connecting roads on either side of it through the parking lots, there's a ton of crashes. Because there's a lot more movement kind of in that informal network. And so formalizing that and then building a bit more of the network out, I think that's going to be how we get that piece done.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments from anyone? Right on. Well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate your time. And I'm sure that we'll be seeing you again on these items in the near future. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks, folks.
Randy just posted, and he's having a little bit of a connection issue, but he'll try to stick with us. Okay, the next item that we have is the unfinished business, the presentation of the Greenway ADA transition, pedestrian plans. Christy.
Hi, everybody. This is Lucy Crown, the Greenway planner. I just wanted to give a brief introduction before the Christies begin their presentation and let you know that we're at the middle point of this Close the Gap plan, the intermediate section. They have done their analysis. We've reached an analysis of all of the input we've received and molded it all together to create this draft that we're ready to talk about. Tonight is our first public meeting. We're having two virtual meetings. They're both the same meeting. You don't have to attend both. In fact, you don't have to attend any if you can't make these two meetings. We will be recording tonight's meeting, which starts at 6 o'clock from 6 to 7:30, and we'll be posting that and our online survey on the project page, which I will put into the chat once the Christies start to talk so that you can have it at your fingertips. The meeting tonight starts at 6. It'll probably be an hour and a half. And we understand that there are people in our community that might need more time or special help to be able to understand or see or hear our presentation and our survey. So Barb and Brad Stein we'll be working with people on an individual basis to help in any way that we can. And my job will be to reach out to neighborhood groups, and I'm particularly interested in reaching out to the legacy neighborhoods and other neighborhoods that we didn't hear from very much the first time that we had input, and making contact with them to talk about their neighborhoods and how this Close the Gap plan will help their neighborhood and help them get around to where they live, work, and play. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Christy Stout and Christy Carter. Although they've been here through the first presentation, they're busy gals. We're really happy with their work, and I'm looking very much forward to your questions about what we have found so far. Thank you.
You're muted, Christy.
Okay.
Yep, good.
I thought I was muted on my phone, or off, talking through my phone. Anyway, I'm Christy Carter. Christy Stout's here. We've been in front of you before. Most of you know us, so we won't spend a lot of time talking about who we are. And we're actually going to kind of skip through some of the background slides just in terms of time. But I'll talk to you, and then I'll hand it over to Christy. So this is what we'll show to the public tonight. And give me a second to get to where we're going to start with you all. This is exciting, watching me flip these slides. Okay. So where we're going to start is kind of we're skipping all of the background of what Close the Gap is, and if you're for some reason new and we need to hit that for questions at the end, we can do that. But what we want to start with is starting with a mutual understanding of what we know about our city, and we know that there are places that people need to walk, but we have missing facilities. This is an example of Thompson Street here. We also know that there are places all across our city that there are sidewalks, there are crosswalks, there are curb ramps, but they're not easy or almost impossible for people with disabilities to use. They maybe can't use them, or they have a hard time using them. And that falls under our ADA transition plan. And then we know that there are people who want to bike or walk greater distances. They might want to get from one end of town to the other, and we don't yet have the connected Greenway system, and we want that and need that so that people can have this crosstown travel, kind of like the interstate highway system of our pedestrian network. We also know that because we have lots of needs, that we have to have some type of prioritization process, because the city can't fix and build everything at one time. Christy's when she takes over, she'll talk to you a little bit about kind of the estimate of what it would take to build this priority network that we've been thinking about. We can't do it all at once, so we need some priorities. And this is next we're going to talk to from the process that we went through to prioritize this network that we're bringing to the community tonight. And we went through a process, and the overall goal of prioritizing is identifying those corridors in the city with the greatest need for connections or maintenance. To get to that goal of identifying those corridors, we went through a variety of data gathering and analysis points and community engagement. And so what we'll talk to you about is our destination equity scoring, our safety scoring, our connectivity scoring, and then help you understand the results and how we plan to use those. And we'll do that for sidewalks and Greenway corridors, and then talk about community engagement, the next steps of community engagement, and just the next steps with the survey. So a little bit about destination and equity, and this kind of hits back to Maggie's point when we were talking about the corridor studies, is kind of two things that we know in our community. One is that, or the goal of this process was to identify those essential places that people need to access. So what are the most basic places that people need to be able to reach? And then what are the areas in our city that have the greatest equity need? Those of you who are familiar with kind of our South Side neighborhood, we talk a lot about that. That's those red areas ringing around downtown, some areas in South Asheville, and this is kind of getting over in the red dot kind of going west is kind of getting over to the Emma area. And when we talk about some of our communities, we're used to hearing about those, but then we have, Shiloh and Oakley. Those are kind of not the highest equity need, but they also are a higher equity need. And the factors that we looked at, median income, for the percent of Black, Indigenous people of color, percent poverty, households without vehicles, households above 65, households with disability, or the householders disabled, and areas with limited English proficiency. So we added those up and came up with those hot spots, as you see the red areas show on the map. And then we also did this thing called destination scoring. This is kind of a wonky way for us to look at what are the places that people need to go to, what are the essential resources that people need to access. So when we think about downtown, which definitely shows up as a destination hotspot, think about Buncombe County services, both health department, social services. We think about the bus station. If we think about grocery stores, VA hospital, all of those essential places, and we have those listed here, and we start layering those. So if you have a grocery store next to, this doesn't happen, but I'm going to make things up. You have a grocery store next to a hospital, next to a transit stop, next to a park, next to a city facility. That area is going to pop up really high as an area that this is a place where this is a pocket of essential services that people need to access. But then when you lay the places that people need to go and you overlay that with the areas that have the highest equity need, we come up with our most important hotspots. So what that is saying is people need to access these essential places, and in particular, these lower income or these equity, these neighborhoods where we have concern about equity. Those are the folks that generally most need to access those services. So we have to figure out a way to link those. And that's why we started in our analysis process with aligning that destination and equity score. And what that gave us, we see the map on the far right, what that gave us is anywhere you see a hot spot, that tells us that's where we need to have the highest concentration of the pedestrian network. So, downtown, obviously that bright yellow spot is a really important spot from an affordable housing standpoint, from a service standpoint, and from a transportation standpoint. So we really want to look at transportation networks in downtown. And then you get kind of rings downtown. You have some pockets in West Asheville, some pockets in South Asheville, and some pockets in East Asheville. And then with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy, who's going to talk to you about how we go through safety, connectivity, and the other pieces of this.
Thanks, Christy. So when we were tasked with, so we got to find a way to prioritize investments. And I'm going to jump back to the point Christy made about how much it would cost. We started looking at, this key network in the city, how much existing sidewalks there versus what if we had sidewalk everywhere, and what if we fixed all of our accessibility issues? And that could be over $1 billion of work, which, even if you took 30 years to get it done, would be over 33 million a year. So it's really a matter of we can't fix it all now. So where do we focus? So Christy went through the destination and equity element, but we also have to consider safety needs. So what we did is try to go through this exercise to identify areas in the city where the pedestrian experience is unsafe for walking due to vehicle exposure. And so the way we did that, on the next slide. Christy, do you mind advancing that, or is it just delayed? There we go. So we kind of asked that question, if a sidewalk was missing or needed a repair, and you had to actually walk in the street, across the street, how unsafe is that? So the factors we included were traffic speed, the volume of traffic, also the number of lanes. 6-lane roadway is going to be a lot more treacherous. And then is there a crash history that indicates a problem already? So we looked at all of those, and then we combined them together on the next page here. And you can see that image on the right was our crash dashboard. We can provide that to folks if they want to see that. It's basically all the crash history for the city. So we gave a score based on safety. So 0 to 5 points based on those factors. And we did an additional point if there was a crash history, 1 to 2 ped crashes, and plus 2 points if there was a fatality or a cluster of crashes more than 2. So the way that plays out, a couple examples on the image on the right, the top image is a 1-point street. That's Murdoch Avenue, North Asheville. It's traffic calmed. There's pedestrian refuge islands. It's a slower speed street and it's 2 lanes. So that's a safer street if you're forced to cross there, versus the photo on the bottom right being Patton Avenue. You see the speed limit there for 45 miles an hour, high volume, and looks like it's about a 6-lane cross section. Plus there are fatalities in this section. So that one got us 7 points for safety. So we combined that with destination and equity. And then what we did find is there's some streets that we don't know the traffic volume on. We don't have accurate speed volume. So it's like anything less than 9,000 vehicles per day, and we don't have a count. So how do we avoid having cul-de-sacs on our priority corridor list? So we came up with this other factor, which is the next one here, connectivity. So how do we make sure these are actually key roadways, links needed so that people can walk from home to wherever they need to be? So this next slide, we talk about how we gave the scoring for connectivity. You can advance that, Christy. So on the right, the photo there, you'll see little houses that kind of imply the neighborhoods. You know, it might be cul-de-sacs, it might be just small neighborhood streets. Someone needs to be able to get from there, maybe across town, and they might follow a series of roadways. So they may join the light blue road there. It's a minor collector where several neighborhoods feed out into a larger roadway. It doesn't have to be a large roadway, but maybe a higher use pedestrian corridor. So we're calling that a pedestrian major collector. And those all feed into a spine network, which should really in an ideal circumstance, feed the whole city. So even though you get down into South Asheville and you have a road like Overlook Road, which came up earlier, you know, you may not have that as a really key destination location midway down Overlook where it's mostly residents. And the safety's, you know, maybe a 3 for that one, but it's really important because it's the only way for people to get through that section of the city. So that would get a 5 for connectivity. So that's how we did these scoring. So the highest, the spine is 5, a kind of duplicate spine, secondary network would be 4, and then 3, 2, 1 down as you get into the smaller roads. So we combined all these to give us an idea of where are the hotspots, and to lead into our next phase of this project. So before we go into the results and I show you how that all panned out, this next slide is to just kind of go over how we're going to use those scores. So one is the goal is to identify corridors with the greatest need for new connections and for maintenance of our existing sidewalks. So on this next slide, you'll see those will go into 2 plans. So the first plan will be the ADA transition plan. And just to be clear, that's often a different funding source than new sidewalks. It's about upgrading what we have. It's a civil rights law that the entire city needs to be brought into compliance. So it's upgrading facilities, and it's also policies and recommendations to make sure we keep the facilities clear and open, and to make sure new facilities are getting built to standards. So what that might mean is at the bottom left, there's a picture of the River Arts District under construction. So how do we keep mobility in place during construction? So if it's a high volume, high speed roadway like Patton, we may not be able to use cones like that image. We're going to need something that's a lot more safe and a better connection. And that one actually isn't a great connection for anyone, but that's a good example of what not to do. But so those policies will be set through this plan. And then also something like audible pedestrian signals. The middle image there shows a blind individual using a seeing eye dog. And when they get to a signal, knowing when you can cross safely. So understanding where are the key, those are expensive. They require planning, design, construction costs. So where do we start with those? And other policy would be that comes out of this, how frequent do we do sidewalk repairs? How frequent does the city scan for needs? And that image on the bottom right is from Vermont Avenue. And for those of you who've walked that, you know that road is in disrepair. And someone in a wheelchair would likely just have to wheel down the middle of the street because that's pretty impassable for most. And so that's the ADA transition plan. And then there's also the pedestrian plan, which will be new facilities. So expanding the network. And we know we can't do it all at once. So where do we prioritize? Also, are there some roads we want to actually change policy and do sidewalk on both sides? Hendersonville Road, Patton Avenue, really pushing that. Also, do we want wider sidewalks or better separation from traffic? And how do we want to address pedestrian crossing safety? So these policies are something that will be put into the plan for those. So with that, what I want to show you is kind of how this panned out. In the survey that we're providing, there's a tool where you can explore this. So you can kind of jump in there and see the different groups of scoring. We just broke it down into tiers. There's 13 to 17 points, tier 1, tier 2, 10 to 12. And what we're going to use for this as it goes down through tier 5 is we're going to step into the next phase of this process, identifying policies based on those tiers, policies and standards, and then also identifying infrastructure needs and better projects, defining projects. So you'll be able to explore that as we go. And as you get in there and explore in that tool, just want to give you a high level, what are we seeing? So that tier 1, 13 to 17 points, to be expected, it's mostly DOT roads. Those are the ones that punch through high volumes, high speeds. A few city roads are Patton Avenue, downtown, Lexington, Ashland. So they have a little bit of a different nature. And many of these either have sidewalks, so they'd be part of the ADA transition plan, or they're already funded, planned, or in study. So Merriman, Tunnel Road, Patton Avenue, New Leicester, things like Sweeten Creek Road, those are ones that have NCDOT projects. So when it comes to policies that might be considered in this realm, we haven't determined this fully. These are going to be, one, how do we address funding? If they're NCDOT roads, we have an opportunity for partnerships. So it's not maybe fully on the city. And then these will be the higher priority for ADA upgrades and maintenance, the higher priority for sidewalk on both sides. These are often transit corridors. And likely these will be the corridors that need wider sidewalks and enhanced pedestrian safety at crossings. And an example on the bottom right is Sweeten Creek Road. You can just see a good example of how we have 5-lane cross section at high speeds, which would not be safe to walk in if necessary. So tier 2, similar, but we also start adding in some smaller side streets. You can see some clusters here. Shiloh, a lot of those roads are in this tier, out in Deaverview, downtown. These are areas that are really important that we do regular maintenance for ADA, but they're not all the same type of road like tier 1 was. We have something like Brooklyn Road in Shiloh. It's a really short road, low volume, versus Sardis Road in West Asheville. So again, many of these projects are funded or currently planned. The downtown orange cluster there, that'll largely be ADA transition plan locations because they have sidewalks. These are also opportunities for some partnerships. And we may see the policy vary here. It may be that it's more based on safety. So if you have a road that scores really high on safety, we may still want to look at sidewalk on two sides. But many of these roads won't need that. So that's just an example of what you see. A couple projects here would be Overlook Road gaps, Springside Road down in Arden, New Hawk Creek Road, Livingston Street, Deaverview, London Road in Shiloh. So you can get an idea of how this is all panning out. And one other example is the photo there of Rock Hill. And I'm sure many of you know that's a pretty high volume roadway and pretty tough to move as a pedestrian. So that's one example of a tier 2. And I can go a little quicker through tier 3, 4, and 5. So this is where we get into, again, a wide variety of roads. You have Sand Hill Road in West Asheville versus Hillside in North Asheville, which is a really urban east-west street. So policies will vary here. Some of the policies we're going to think about here are going to be shared streets, traffic calming on those lower speed, lower volume streets. Many of these roads are going to be part of potential neighborhood greenway alignments. And some of the projects that rise to the top are Brevard Road in West Asheville. And the photo on the bottom right shows, that's one of those roads where there is a worn path on the side with no sidewalk. And it is hard to cross there. So that is an example of, based on volume and speed, likely the policy in those instances would be sidewalk both sides. We also have Riceville Road on here, Kenilworth. Lakeshore Drive's another good example in North Asheville, where there's really no other place for people to connect to the network. So they're walking there where it's unsafe. And so tier 4, this is where we're really getting to the meat of likely next bond projects, next round of new sidewalk gaps that could be funded. Many of these aren't funded yet. They're often will just likely be one sidewalk on one side because they're low volume, lower speed streets, but they're still part of the key network. And many of them will also be part of neighborhood greenways. So some of the roads that rise to the top here are Michigan Avenue in West Asheville. You have Merriman Avenue up above Beaver Dam Road. Let's see, Pearson Drive in North Asheville. So as you explore these layers, you can see where they pan out. And then tier 5 is similar. I'll just go over a couple projects there. Joyner Road, the photo on the bottom right, that's just above Amboy Road. And I believe that is on the list of potential sidewalks for the next bond. So you can kind of see where those pan out after this analysis. So what we're asking people to do is take a look at that tool, and we'll go through that with the public and just identify if there are any missing links that we should have scored before we move into project development and policy recommendations. So that's kind of our checkpoint here is, did we miss any key roads that are really needed to move around the city? And I think we're out about 10 minutes. I think I can get through the the Greenway work quickly. Kim from Equinox has led our Greenway analysis. She wasn't able to join us today, but I'll go over that briefly. So as Christy talked about earlier, is that the goal is to have a Greenway spine so people can get around town. And the process that we went through on the next slide was, so Equinox did a full constructability analysis to look at the previously planned greenways, to look at constructability, environmental issues, available land, future development patterns, and refined that spine network. So there's an expansion and refinement of the spine. That was the first task. And then the second task, next slide, was to really look at building out beyond the spine. And so this is similar to the PED network in that there's got to be a whole system. You know, how do you get from door to where, from your door and your home to where you need to go in town? So really looking at different typologies. So what is a Greenway spine might look different than what needs to get to your neighborhood in North Asheville or South Asheville or wherever you're at in the city. So in this next slide, you'll see, and we've already defined the spine, so I'll just move out. We moved into the second point on this page, which is developing other greenway types. So to connect the network into neighborhoods and urban centers to allow for door-to-door greenway trips by foot or bike. So the new typologies that were developed in this process are major and minor connector greenways. So past the spine, it's that next set of greenways, a set of neighborhood greenways, and then there's also a parallel natural surface trail initiative that Lucy is running. In the top right photo on the right, you'll see there are, it's an example of a shared street or what could be a neighborhood greenway. So they're often slow streets, often shared streets, traffic calming, wayfinding, things of that nature. And I think I have more on that on the next slide. So a neighborhood greenway is kind of a newer concept, so we want to introduce that to folks. The image on the right, there are wayfinding signs, the bottom circle in the middle of the page. So that's often, you know, to get from a greenway to areas of town, you would develop a branding and give it a name and then direct people how to get around. So, you know, Merriman's a real obstacle. So how do we develop neighborhood greenways so folks can move to and from downtown into North Asheville or into West Asheville, all the different areas of the city using these slow streets networks. So they're often slow speed, low volume, traffic calming elements, often diverting traffic where we can to keep it low volume, and then the wayfinding element and some branding. So that is a new element we're including in this plan. And so the results of that, you'll be able to explore as well. There'll be a map and a tool, and we're asking people to help us weigh in on not so much the spine, because the spine has to go where there's availability for, across town connectors. It's based on constructability. We want people to weigh in on the neighborhood connector alignments and the major minor connector greenways to give the city some direction on where to focus next and if there are any critical issues with these corridors. So the next slide shows you the Greenway Spine. Equinox is also working with Lucy to develop standards for those. They're going to be wider greenways, things like the River Arts District, Wilma Dykeman Trail, which is shown in the bottom right image. And then the major minor collectors are going to have a different standard. They'll often be slightly narrower, but still really important high quality of service connections. So an example would be Reed Creek Greenway or Glens Creek. So there are many newly defined major minor greenways, and we want folks to be able to rank those and tell us what they think. And then the last set are the neighborhood greenways. So we've identified corridors, gave them a name, a series of roadways, so those can be explored. And again, those are the shared streets, often going to be targets for traffic calming, wayfinding, things of that nature. So that's kind of what's come out of the whole greenway analysis. And the next step for us is to get that survey results. Christy, I don't know if you want to go ahead and wrap that up real quick.
Sure. So in terms of how we're going to use the input, the survey is asking people to confirm community priorities and identify problem spots in the network that we have designed. And then we're also asking folks to confirm ADA priorities, and that will take a little bit more work beyond the survey. We'll actually have focus groups of people who have disabilities. Those will be happening kind of in the first couple of weeks of September to really kind of focus in. Is there anything that we missed? What do you need to get around? Where do you need to get around to, just to make sure that we got that right from the kind of data analysis piece of that. This will be the person confirmation. And then we will come out after that with revised corridors and priorities and start developing specific projects for funding. So it's a lot to look at right now, but by the time we develop this and come before the community the next time, it'll be in bite-sized pieces that people can kind of see more specifically. Here's where I live, and here are the projects that may happen near my neighborhood. And then the other thing that we want folks to know is that we will have another community input point for Close the Gap, but I think you all know this, but for every project that's out there, when it becomes an actual funded project and the city or DOT is trying to implement it, there will be another round of community input to get into some of those more really specific details. So more input to come. And for those of you who are not taking or won't be attending one of our meetings this week, this next series of slides just gives some overview of the survey. And Christy, do you want to jump back in for this part of it?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it would be helpful for everyone. You'd rather have some time for Q&A versus going through how to take the survey. I would leave that open, because the next slides are more instructions how to take the survey that we have online. It's pretty self-explanatory. I think what could be interesting, well, actually, let me go ahead and let y'all chime in. Do you want to jump into Q&A?
Yeah, if we're looking for comments, looking to save some time, I'd love to be able to have a little bit of time where we can ask some questions.
Yeah,
get some
sure, that's fine. Yeah.
Do folks have questions? Maggie?
Hey, yeah, just wondering about, surprise, surprise, your inclusive engagement. I know y'all, this is something you think about, but like, I love the idea with the how you reach out to service providers early and often, because getting actual individuals can be tricky, and I get that. But as this type of thing builds out, we are going to hear fears of gentrification. We are going to hear fears and truths sometimes of in equitable infrastructure development and planning resources. And so the partnerships to make sure that the service providers for housing development, the service providers representing voices of our Black communities and our legacy neighborhoods. And I know, Lucy, you mentioned early on that you'll be really targeting the relationships you have in those areas. So just want to give props to that and thank that. And then curious if the direct work that the Christies are doing will also be folding that in. Or maybe it's just Lucy, the Christies are all one gang and that's how it works. And I'm still catching up on how it is. But, yeah.
That's correct. There's not enough money in our budget. That's me.
Cool.
I'm happy to do it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of things just to hit on that, Maggie. We do have a citizens advisory committee that is pretty diverse. I will say this project has, COVID has been hard on this project. And we've had lots of great ideas, but every time we got ready to execute them, they kind of got railroaded. And so we're doing this round of public meetings. Lucy, the city on this project is doing a lot of the neighborhood outreach. And so what we do is supply the materials for Lucy, and Lucy's actually the one going out to meet with those neighborhoods. And we're supporting that. Then the other thing, I'm just throwing a bunch of things out. The other thing that I picked up on, like we do have lines on the map for Emma and Shiloh, and the Emma community in particular. Here's the West Asheville Greenway, and we have this kind of pocket of neighborhood greenways, and there certainly are sidewalks planned for that area too. Those greenways, when we get to the point where we're actually putting those out as policy, we'll say these are recommended because we think that they're key links in the network. However, until there's a neighborhood stabilization plan in place for Emma, the city probably wouldn't actively pursue those lines because that's what the Emma community has said. They have concerns about a greenway coming into their neighborhood right now because the gentrification game is so high there. Likewise, Burton Street's a little bit of a different story. Shiloh's a different story. Southside's a different story. They all have their own stories. So that's the work that Lucy's doing in terms of really getting those neighborhoods that probably have the most danger of gentrification and the most fear of multimodal infrastructure coming into their neighborhood. And then as far as service providers, yes, we're talking to folks and have been talking to folks as well, not quite like we did with Tunnel Road, but those folks are definitely involved.
One other point I want to hit too is that our recommendations, a lot of the neighborhood greenways and projects that come out of this, the recommendations we'll have is that they need an initial study. And that should involve really detailed public engagement, sit down with those communities, see what their needs are. So for example, a road like Livingston Street, that it may not be that they want what we're envisioning. It may just be that they want a sidewalk gap filled in some crossings, or, thinking through that, it's going to be during implementation an integrated process with public engagement. And we'll make sure those recommendations are in what come out of our project.
Thanks, y'all. I would just love hearing the thoughtfulness and understanding and learning about how y'all are thinking about it.
Michael?
We're learning.
Sorry. Michael?
Yeah, so I love this data. I love these maps. And I was wondering, or maybe I just missed it, where can I take a look at them so I can do a deep dive on all these roads and corridors?
I could put the survey link in Lucy put the link to the project, which will have all that. I can also drop the survey link in there. The neat thing is you can turn the tiers on and off. Yeah, I'll drop it in there. You can turn all the levels on and off and show where there's existing sidewalks versus where there aren't, and kind of explore. So that, I don't know if is it live now, Christy, the survey?
Yeah.
I think it is. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So there you go. It's
just
in the chat box.
Survey then, what you're saying. Okay.
Yes. Yep. You can expand it and open it and do some exploring.
Oh, great. Thanks. Anyone else have any questions or comments? I had a quick one. I'm sure it's a part of it, but I just didn't see it mentioned. Do we have an overlay of the walk to school route network that's being included in this as part of the data points?
Do we have a formal walk to school network that you guys are working on?
That's a good question. I do not know that.
As far as I know, there is not a formal walk to school network. Now, sometimes things pop up and we haven't been given that information, so we would love it if there is one. But if you think back to the destination piece, like the location of schools and making sure there are connections to those schools was a big part of our thought process in going into the network. So it would be, when you get in there and get to look at the survey, if you go to, let's say like Jones over in North Asheville and you zoom in on that area, you'll see that we've made connections to from the schools to the major routes. So I could talk to what we did, but if there are other things that we need to add in, let us know.
And that is one thing I looked at when I was doing the connectivity scoring. Areas that were something like Springside Drive or in West Asheville or East Asheville, there's a couple schools that didn't have sidewalks. So we made sure those were linked as a 5 in connectivity. And then they're also in the destination and equity score. So they'll definitely be considered in project development. But like Christy said, yeah, we're not familiar with that layer yet. So
yeah, and Barb just confirmed that there wasn't one. So I beg
okay.
pardon.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Michael?
So I was wondering if we could get a little bit more clarity, or at least just for me. You'd mentioned that there are corridors that we need to put an additional sidewalk on the opposite side of the road, and I get that, but would that take precedent over filling in gaps where there's missing sidewalks, or how do you guys rate that?
Yeah, so that's something we haven't got to that portion of. That's something that's going to be a city decision. And I believe we will move into the policy and recommendations as far as prioritization next. Most of those are on DOT roads. And so as long as it's in the plan, then it also helps with DOT's complete streets plan. So if they do come through and do a project, the sidewalk's on there to be done. But as far as, it may be that they're different funding sources. If you have something like South Asheville, Hendersonville Road, we have the Greenway now planned, a multi-use side path plan. So that's going to be a project that wouldn't necessarily be coming out of taking away from segments that we're doing in the bond projects. So they'll all kind of fall in a different funding pod and prioritization as we move forward.
Did that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, that was a little roundabout.
Because I think I heard a little bit something different, but maybe I didn't.
I mean, I think I can chew on it, but it just sounds like it remains to be seen.
We don't know yet. We don't really know yet. We need to go dig into projects and see how they're being funded to see the order of implementation, whether it affects that. There are a lot of factors.
And I think this was the undertone of what I was hearing. So I think, what I was going to say is one of the challenges. Go ahead, Michael. Okay, I'm going to go. I think one of the challenges that you might be hitting on, and maybe I'm reading too much into what you're saying, is that one of the challenges that the city is going to have with implementation is there's this existing sidewalk network that isn't good enough. It needs to be better. It needs to be brought up into ADA compliance. And then there are also gaps. And in a lot of places, those are equally important. And so the decision in terms of what to do versus ADA transition work versus filling gaps is going to be a really hard decision for the city to think about from a funding standpoint, because there's civil rights law, you must do this versus you should do this. But the should do this often fills a really important gap, but that might prevent something on the ADA transition plan list from being done. And then that might be when some of those decisions come of, well, maybe we can do one sidewalk on one side of the road here because it gets a gap filled, but we also have to fund this other project over here because it's an ADA transition plan project.
Cool. I appreciate that.
I think it gives you an idea of how challenging some of the decisions are going to be because we're trying to stretch underfunded work, right? So it's going to be the challenge.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like it's a dynamic process. There's a lot. I'm excited to go in and play with that tool. It also seems a little bit encouraging that many of these things are partially funded or already in the process of being funded. So we're already kind of tackling some of the biggest challenges that we face currently. Great. Without any other comments, thank you very much, folks. As always, it's great. It's good to see you, Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. I'm always happy.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. I think we may have, I think Jessica had to step away, so we'll kind of go through this without our fearless leader, see if we can muscle through. The Merriman, actually Maggie left as well, so we're going to put that Merriman update on the back burner for those folks. We'll go into the general committee updates. John, looks like maybe John he's still here, John? You got taken off? Oop, John is gone as well. All right, so we're peeling off quickly. The Greenway Committee, Lucy, we just had a lot of information on that. Is there anything else that we need? I think we kind of covered it there.
No, the only thing that they've been working on is reviewing the I-26 connector projects and finding any recommendations that need to be said to the Aesthetics Committee and to the Division 13 of DOT.
Okay, great, thank you. Next is the Bike Ped Task Force. Some folks from the Bike Ped, do you want to give us a quick update?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thanks,
so the main thing we had this last meeting was the Bike Ped counts, which are coming up. We do those annually. It's part of a national effort that we monitor certain intersections in town to see what the bike and ped count is. And that'll be middle September, the 14th to the 16th. And then, we talked about also we've helped with the Close the Gap survey by surveying, counting people, or surveying people, actually doing the surveys on number of greenways and stuff too.
Grant, thank you very much. P&Z, Joe?
The biggest thing we had last month was actually the same presentations we saw here was Tunnel Road and Hendersonville Road. So yeah, that was it.
Catch it all. Look at that. Excellent. Thank you. The Neighborhood Advisory Committee, Anna couldn't join us today, but she did send me a quick update. She had 2 items on there. The first one is that she mentioned that Lucy made a presentation with the GAP plan, one that we just experienced here. And one of the call-outs that she has is that it looks like they're still looking for folks to respond in 28801, 28803, and 28805. So if there are folks that are participating or paying attention to this publication, if you could participate in that, that'd be great. The second item that she brought up was that city staff and the Communications and Public Engagement Department are currently working on putting together a community engagement grants program that is set to launch this fall. These grants are intended to build neighborhood capacity and strengthen the partnerships between neighborhood organizations and city staff. The NAC has been working with the staff to provide the input in the application process and eligibility criteria, and we should have more on this from Anna at our September meeting. So thanks to Anna for that update. The next is the I-26 Aesthetics Committee. I don't know that we have. I don't think we have anyone present here. That's okay. Move on. Please note the list of projects and our future agenda items. Do we have any other questions or comments? All right, we're all set. Thanks, everybody. We're adjourned. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.